Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is the Best of Both Worlds, Heroes and Icons, with me, Rabbi Uri Cohen. Just want to announce and clarify that this class will continue for the next 2 weeks at the same time, even though it will be Hanukkah in Israel at that time next week, and it'll be Hanukkah, I think, everywhere the next week. In any case, so this will, that's my plan is to continue in any case, and sorry if it doesn't work with your schedule. Don't forget, you can always watch the video on the Web Yeshiva course page afterwards. This is this topic. Oh, and let me just remind everyone that there's a supplementary material which I uploaded to the website. I have it here as well. Harry Potter #3, Dealing with Death by Rabbi Chaim Perlmutter, who I think lives in Beit Shemesh. But this is very different for me anyway from my last week's class. Last week's class was about the Matrix, and even though I had read the material, let's say 15 years ago, I hardly ever have spoken about it. I think this was only maybe the second time that I gave this particular talk. This particular, but what we're doing in this session about Harry Potter, this variation of it, I've only done once or twice, but giving a class on this topic about Harry Potter and Torah issues, this one I've given a bunch of times, and the first time was just about 20 years ago. November 2000, when my wife and I were on Shlichut in Syracuse, and Harry Potter was becoming a big thing. It seems a little strange now because it's been 13 years since the 7-book series ended, but as you may recall, while the books were coming out between 98, 97 in England, but in America between 1998 and 2007, there was this huge excitement and buzz about the books and the release of each book and speculation about what was going to happen. And apparently, people who were children during this time, it was like this special excitement that was not repeated or will not be repeated for anything else. And lots of parents were like, well, you know, I never see children being excited about books. The question, but now that the series is over and has been over for a number of years, the question is, can we look back and evaluate it in ways that might not have been possible at the time, certainly not while the series was still coming out. Some of the books that I'll show you the covers of shortly came out while the series was still being written and then shown in films. And I understand why people would want to do that, would want to write about the books to present their theories and approaches. But if you're writing about after the 3rd book or even the 5th book, how can you get a sense of the big picture? You could talk about a particular book, but at least one of the authors whom we're going to see the books of, he rewrote his book 4 times because every time a new book came out, there are different perspectives, different issues. There's a lot to say about Harry Potter in general and from a Torah perspective, but I want to talk about a few issues in this session, and I want to start by showing you some of the covers of some of the books that I've read on the books I've read on the subject. This you might recognize from our first session. These are the 7 books of the series as they were published in England for adults, so that they resemble, as I think Richie said at the time, they resemble or reminiscent of the Game of Thrones type books. These are serious, these are heavy, these are dark, and yesh mashu bazeh. They're anyway. I thought that was an interesting perspective. this book is called, which I actually just finished reading today. Came out 10 years ago, which is relatively late for this literature, but I only finished reading it today, by The Riddles of Harry Potter by Dr. Shiro Wolowski. She used to be a professor of English at Yale, and she made Aliyah in, I think, 1985, and since then she's been teaching English literature and American Studies at Hebrew U. This is one of the books that it's by an academic, but it's not in academic jargon, and she pulls together a lot of interesting ideas, perspectives, and they're all basically pshat. Like she doesn't quote so much of secondary literature, except in the end notes. I thought it was relatively easy, surprisingly perhaps easy to read and get through. Edmund Kern is a professor of philosophy who specializes in Stoics, the philosophy of the Stoics, and he wrote The Wisdom of Harry Potter after. He wrote in 2003, so that's when only the first, I think, 5 books had come out. But he's focusing on morality, moral choices, which we're going to speak about a little bit. Charmed Life, Spirituality of Potterworld by Francis Bridger is also about morality, and also some about religion, to some extent responding to the issues in the first couple of years that there were in America. Anyway, there were at least some minority, but some evangelical Christians who got very upset about these books. Isn't magic, isn't that a devil thing? Isn't that like opposed to the will of God? How can we support these books? The vast majority of Christians were never bothered by these at all, but there is a literature on the subject, and Connie Neal wrote 2 books on the subject. What's a Christian to do with Harry Potter, which is like tackling these issues directly, and then The Gospel According to Harry Potter, Spirituality and the Stories of the World's Most Famous Seeker. I'll play on words there because Harry Potter is the seeker, plays the seeker in Quidditch. The next author is John Granger, not related to Hermione. He is a teacher who has taught Latin. He's a religious Christian, actually an Orthodox Christian, and he is either the first to notice, or certainly the one to popularize the importance of alchemy in the Harry Potter books, which we'll get to in this session. He calls himself the Hogwarts Professor, and that's his website, hogwartsprofessor.com. Basically taking the books seriously as literature, but I just want to show you his different books. The Hidden Key to Harry Potter, which he wrote as far back as 2002. Most of these books by Granger were published by a religious publisher, meaning Christian. Looking for God in Harry Potter is a rewrite after 2004. And he has another book that I didn't read called The Deathly Hallows Lectures, How Harry Cast His Spell. Oh, I forgot I'm supposed to hold up the books when I own them. Here's the Wisdom of Harry Potter. How Harry Cast His Spell, the meaning behind the mania for J.K. Rowling's best-selling books. It's a little dense, but he covers a lot of different themes in the book. That's like his most pulling together everything. Whereas this book, the last book that he published back in 2008, 2009, Harry Potter's Bookshelf, great books behind the Hogwarts Adventures. This I would recommend actually over the other one, except for somebody who's like really, really into Harry Potter, because this book is not directly about Harry Potter. It's about J.K. Rowling as an author, J.K. Rowling and her place in English literature. And each chapter deals with a different genre or theme in Western literature and gives a few examples. And if J.K. Rowling has quoted those authors, then he brings that up. And he points out how the Harry Potter books follow in that example as well. So even some stuff that is relatively obvious. Harry Potter as a gothic, spooky type book, Harry Potter as a boarding school story, that would seem obvious, but like how Harry Potter is like Jane Austen's books, and J.K. Rowling is a huge fan of Jane Austen. I did not know any of that at all, so that I would definitely recommend Harry Potter's Bookshelf. A couple of other books that I read, which are collections of essays more in the style of the matrix ones that we saw last time, namely like a dozen different people, usually professors, writing about this topic. So that was missed that. Reading Harry Potter. Mapping the world of Harry Potter. This is actually a little bit different. Let me just make this larger. Science fiction and fantasy authors explore the best-selling fantasy series of all time. Edited by Mercedes Lackey. She is a well-known fantasy author. And I thought this book had a lot of insights. It's not that well-known, but it's worth reading. The Ivory Tower and Harry Potter, that's all by professors. That, to be honest, I did not read, but I made sure to get a copy of it in order to read this essay, which is called "You Say Jelly, I Say Jello," Harry Potter and the Transfiguration of Language by Professor Philip Nell. And that's about how the American publisher, Scholastic, changed a lot of different things in the first book and a little bit less in the second book and even less in the third book. But what does it mean when you move a book from British English to American English? So anybody who's interested in language, I'd recommend that essay. Harry Potter and Torah, by somebody who lives here in Beit Shemesh, is cute. I think it's fine, but it's more like in the style of, oh, you're reading about magic? The Torah talks about magic also. Oh, you're reading about ghosts? Oh, let's talk about midrashim about ghosts. And I feel like it's a little bit too transparent about not so much interested in Harry Potter, interested in Torah, and using Harry Potter as an excuse to talk about Torah, which maybe some people like, but some of us not so much. As opposed to Rabbi Moshe Rosenberg, who teaches at SAR in New York and is a rabbi of Eitz Chaim Synagogue in Kew Gardens Hills. He has published several books about basically compare and contrast Harry Potter and Torah. So this one, the unofficial Hogwarts Haggadah, it's very colorful. I would say that this is primarily addressed to children, as is the next book he wrote, the unofficial Muggle Megillah, which I don't actually have a copy of. It's for children, and adults can read it as well, as opposed to his first book, Rabbi Rosenberg's first Harry Potter book, Morality for Muggles, Ethics in the Bible and the World of Harry Potter. That, I would say, is a book for adults, and children can read it also. He also, this is the last book cover I'm showing, he expanded it a dozen years later. This is the newer edition, Morality for Muggles, revised and expanded edition. And that's, like I started to say before, it's about Middot, but it's a compare and contrast. Here's a chapter about making choices. Here's a chapter about prejudice. Here's a chapter about good and evil. Compare and contrast. I think he does an excellent job. Okay, let's go back to the source sheet. And the first page of this source sheet is maybe the only page one of the only pages that's very similar to the way I had it the first time, or one of the first times that I taught this class. These are some good ideas, good midot, that appear in quotes in the books. Not just that the books talk about these topics, but that the books actually have an insight into the topic that you might not have had otherwise. I mean, it's nice to say, well, let's talk about free will, and now let's talk about free will in Harry Potter books. Oh, let's talk about prejudice in the Torah. Oh, now let's compare with prejudice in Harry Potter. That's fine, but it doesn't happen that often, at least in my experience, where you read something and you're like, oh, now I understand this thing that I didn't know until now in Musar and Torah. So for example, how important? So this letter to the editor in Newsday, Long Island newspaper, back in 2000, is responding to some criticism very, very early of Harry Potter series. And this guy writes that Harry Potter is talented, but he has to learn how to use his talent. Maybe the real message of the Harry Potter books, if you need one, is learning is important. Yes and no, meaning that even already back in the first book, it's clear that Harry Potter is not the best student. There is someone who's a really, really good student, and that's Hermione. But they're not of the four houses the way that the students are sorted in Hogwarts. They're not in Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw is the house for the students where the intellect, the mind, is more important than anything else. I don't know about you, but if I were in Hogwarts, I would certainly be in Ravenclaw. There are some people where they're not sure. I have no question at all. Ravenclaw is not at the center of the series. And furthermore, some people have asked, wait a minute, if Hermione is such an amazing student, then why isn't she in Ravenclaw? So the answer to this question is given in a line in the first book, which going to we have just a few short video clips I want to share, just stuff from the first page. Just a minute. Where did it go? Yeah. So this is near the end of the first book. Everybody see Friendship and Bravery here in YouTube? Okay. This is also the quote from the first page.
You'll be okay, Harry. You're a great wizard. You really are.
Not as good as you.
Me, books, cleverness. There are more important things. Friendship and bravery.
Okay, so what did Hermione just say after Harry says, "Oh, I'm not as good as you," which is true. He is nowhere near as good a student, a scholar, etc., as Hermione. She says, "Me, books and cleverness, they're more important things. Friendship and bravery. Friendship and bravery are two major themes of the first book and all the other books." Why is Hermione? I forgot which article presents this. Why is Hermione in Gryffindor, the house of students who are brave? Because it's not that so much that she's braver than she's smart, because she's really both. It's that being brave is more important to her than is being smart. And it turns out that the sorting hat, the magical item that decides on your first day in the school which of the four houses you're sorted into, it reads your mind, tries to guess. It doesn't depend on what you're good at. It depends on what you think is important. That's why Hermione is in Gryffindor and not Ravenclaw, and that's also why, moving on to the next quote, which is 3 on the source sheet, that's also why Harry Potter, the person, is in Gryffindor and not Slytherin.
So the sorting hat was right. I should be in Slytherin.
It's true, Harry. You possess many of the qualities that Voldemort himself prizes. Determination, resourcefulness, and if I may say so, a certain disregard for the rules. Why then did the sorting hat place you in Gryffindor?
Because I asked it to.
Exactly, Harry, exactly. Which makes you different from Voldemort. It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Let me repeat that. I don't know if the sound might not have come out so clearly. Harry says, "Well, but like the sorting hat only put me in Gryffindor because I asked for it. I really have a talent to be like the evil Voldemort and like the nasty Snape, and people who are interested in control and power. So doesn't that say something bad about me?" That's more or less the way it's formulated in the book is Harry says in a defeated voice, "It only put me in Gryffindor because I asked not to go in Slytherin." And Dumbledore says, the head of the school says, exactly in the book, which makes you very different from Voldemort. It's our choices that show what we truly are far more than our abilities. That concept, that abilities are nowhere near as important as the choices that we make, that is a lesson that everybody needs to learn. Non-Jews, Jews, Orthodox Jews, whether we are obsessed with intellectual talent or sports talent or any other talent of where we focus on how talented the person is and we overlook the choices that they make, what kind of person that they act as. And this is saying, no. The talent is important, but nowhere near what's as important as our choices that show who we are. That is seems to me is a super important point, and that's one that is often overlooked. Look, two more brief video clips. Here's one. These are all from, well, that was from the Chamber of Secrets. This is back to the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone. This is near the end of the book after the bad guy's been vanquished, and Dumbledore announces the points that are being awarded to each school. We're tied with Slytherin.
It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to your enemies, but a great deal more to stand up to your friends. I award 10 points to Neville Longbottom.
What happened in this book was that as Neville is, in this book, in the first several books, he's a very shy person. He's in Gryffindor because he wants to be brave, but we don't see it so much. And Dumbledore says, you know what? That time earlier when his friends were about to go and break the rules in order to save the day, and he tried to stop them. Neville tried unsuccessfully, but he tried to stop them. Dumbledore says, you know what? There are all kinds of courage. It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. I feel like that is a point I never heard anybody else make. Meaning, we could talk about it. Conformity is a problem if all your friends jumped off the Empire State Building. Would you do that too? Conformity is a major pressure, especially for children, and especially for teenagers. But if you reframe it as don't conform, why don't follow everybody else, don't do what everybody else is doing just because they're doing it. Don't formulate it as being a nonconformist. Formulate it as be brave. Be brave is stand up for what you believe. Oh, P.S. It might mean that you're going against other people, but it's not about. Don't focus on the nonconformity. Focus on doing the right thing or standing up for what you believe. That's something I never heard in any other context at all. And one last point. This will be our last video. It's only 5 seconds. This is from the end of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Soon we must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy.
Everybody get that? Let me repeat. We will have to choose between what is right and what is easy. That, it seems to me, is an unbelievable line because, just Lahavdil, we find in the Torah, Hashem says in Parsha Re'eh, see, I put before you good and bad and life and death, and choose good. Choose the right thing. Well, of course everybody wants to choose good and life. The problem is, in real day-to-day living, it's often not clear what the right thing to do is. This one line that Rowling has Dumbledore say, it seems to me, is a moral advancement, just in that one line, because it says that you're not going to be faced with a choice between what is right and what is wrong. Those happen occasionally, but more often, you're faced with the choice between what's easy and not so easy. And just because we don't view things, things don't have signs on them that say, this is evil, don't choose it. So people often usually make choices based on what feels good and what's easier. And this line is saying, you know what? If one of the choices is what's easy, you should consider the possibility that that's the wrong choice. That choosing it because it's easy is actually the wrong thing to do. And stop looking at choices from the perspective of what's easy. Don't choose anything because it's easy. Choose because of what's right. It's a paradigm shift. Fascinating. I never saw that anywhere else. For me, anyway, it's like just that one line would be worth writing an entire library of books. And J.K. Rowling herself pointed to this line in an interview in 2000. And she describes it, there's some very evil people, like Voldemort, and then there are people like Wormtail, who out of cowardice will stand in the shadow of the strongest person. He is evil, but in a not-so-obvious way. What's very important for me is when Dumbledore says, you have to choose between what is right and what is easy. That's a setup for the next 3 books. Everyone's going to have to choose, because what is easy is often not right. I feel like that is an advancement. That is something, seems to me, is a brilliant insight, which people quote this from. This is not an obscure quote, as Dumbledore quotes go, but I feel like it should really get more recognition. Going to skip ahead through sources 6, 7, and 8 that compare the world of the wizards and witches to the world of Jews, and just briefly in source number 8. This series provides a perfect parable for the causes of the destruction of the temple. In other words, the infighting and the prejudice and the my group is good, your group is bad. But I want to focus on something now that has been recognized, but not as much as you would think. I did not realize this when I first read the books. That is the importance of the acceptance of death as a major theme in the books, and not just a major theme, but a theme that carries a lot of moral and Jewish weight behind it. J.K. Rowling said when somebody asked her in 2007, after the last book came out, what does it mean, the master of death, is a phrase that comes up in the last book. Dumbledore explains in the King's Cross chapter, that's where Harry is in between life and death, and Dumbledore is in his mind. The real master of death accepts that he must die. There are much worse things in the world of the living, much worse things than death. It's not about, that's a quote from the book, but the reason I put this in is that Rowling paraphrased it in this interview. It's not about striving for immortality. It's about accepting mortality. In the context of that chapter, mortality as in one's own mortality. Voldemort is obsessed with living forever, and he'll do whatever it takes and murder whoever, commit whatever murders and atrocities in order to live forever. And every time he does so, every time he commits evil, it takes away part of him. It backfires in lots of different ways. Yes, but beyond that, and beyond the acceptance of his own death, what appears over and over again in the 7 books is the acceptance of the death of those people we know and love who have died already, to accept their death and to be able to move on. As formulated, first, an interview with J.K. Rowling as far back as 2000, in News source number 10, not until I'd reread what I'd written did I realize that that had been taken entirely from how I felt about my mother's death. We'll get to her mother's death shortly. In fact, she says death, bereavement, and what death means, that's one of the central themes in all 7 books. She wrote this, she said this in 2000. There were only 4 books at the time. And she's saying, I'm just telling you, that's not just the first 4, but the next 3 as well. It became, the interview that pulled this out the most was in the Telegraph from London in 2006. She started crying during the interview, recalling the most traumatizing moment of her life. It was the day in 1991 when her mother, Anne, died at age 45 after a 10-year battle against multiple sclerosis. And then she starts telling the story about how she found out about it, and she was writing about Harry Potter, but she never told her mother about it. Rowling is startled by her tears. She is naturally reserved and very private. She's also very ordered and in control. She dabs a preferred napkin to her eyes and pauses before continuing. Barely a day goes by when I do not think of her. There would be so much to tell her, impossibly much. Meaning, not just that she took it hard when her mother died, and and Joanne Rowling was only in her 20s, but that she thinks about her all the time. She became a patron of the Multiple Sclerosis Society of Scotland. She's from Scotland. Her mother's condition forged that, meaning they knew for a while that her mother's situation was deteriorating. It forged her own psychological strengths and vulnerabilities, as well as leading her to make Harry Potter suffer the death of his parents. That's the major backstory that keeps coming up in the books. The interviewer writes, "Death is the key to understanding J.K. Rowling. Her greatest fear is of someone she loves dying. My books," she says, "are largely about death." And it's not just that. Already back in, so you say, okay, that's nice. The importance of being able to deal with death. That I see it goes back to her own experience, and she put in the book. Okay, but why is that such a big deal? What I'm going to argue now is that it's a big deal because J.K. Rowling continues to write in the realm of fantasy fiction. And it is specifically in the realm of science fiction and fantasy that this is basically unheard of. What do you mean? When we talk about acceptance of death, part of accepting someone's death is that you have to internalize that they're not coming back. So take a look. I'll explain this momentarily. There was an interview way back, Source 12, way back in 1999, when after the first two books, maybe the third, and J.K. Rowling was interviewed on the radio, and a kid called in, and the interviewer, the DJ, asked this kid, "What's your guess about Lily, Harry's mother, who has been killed in the backstory of the series?" So this kid Peter said, "I'm guessing that maybe she's going to come back to life, maybe in the 7th book or something like that," which would totally make sense in the context of so many other fantasy series. But Rowling said, and this is, I think, the first time she said it publicly, "Well, when I started writing the book, the first thing I had to decide was not what magic can do, but what it can't do. And one of the most important things I decided was that magic, in the Harry Potter world, magic cannot bring dead people back to life. One of the most profound things, the natural law of death applies to wizards as it applies to muggles. There's no returning once you're properly dead. So I'm afraid there will be no coming back for Harry's parents." Well, have a nice day, kid. Because of the background, because of her background, that it was so important to her to cope with the death of her mother, she made sure that it was not just a part of the books, but a major part of the books, that magic can do lots of things in fantasy books. For Rowling's world, it cannot bring people back to life. And why is this a big fetish? Because in the context of fantasy fiction, this is basically the opposite of what you expect. I want to share with you a chart. From the book. Where'd it go? The book called Super Graphic: A Visual Guide to the Comic Book Universe by Tim Leong, 2013. I read this past summer. It is every page has a chart or a series of charts about either the world inside comic books, graphic novels, or the world about publishing and writing comic books. And this chart is called "How Long Characters Stayed Dead." Can everybody see it? Starting from 1981 and going through 2012. Favorite character get killed off in the comics? Don't worry, chances are they'll rise again. And then that heart-stopping moment will be explained away. Oh, it was a clone. It was a dream. That darn multiverse. And insert character here will return to the land of the living. A bunch of characters are given here from when they died and when they came back. Notice that Superman is here in between 92 and 93. When the media got the story back in '92. Oh no, DC is killing off Superman. Wow, that's so radical. The fans are like, no, actually, not so much, because it's only a matter of time before they will bring him back. And not only did they bring him back, they took a long time bringing him back and making a big deal about that. Think about it. Think about what we know, not just in comic books, which is, as we've discussed, a type of fantasy fiction. What other characters in fantasy literature die and come back to life? So Gandalf. We could spend a whole hour talking about that right now, but I'll just briefly list, a few of the really famous ones, and then a few of the semi-famous ones. Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings, Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. Oh, I see Richie wrote Aslan, thank you. Spock in the Star Trek films. He dies in 2 and comes back in 3. From last week, Neo and Trinity both die and are resurrected in the first Matrix movie. Remember E.T.? Oh yeah, E.T. dies and comes back to life. The original Battlestar Galactica, Starbuck, dies and comes back to life. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., oh, Agent Coulson. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, yes, she died and was brought back to life twice. Wesley and the Princess Bride. Okay, he was only mostly dead. TV Tropes has a list of over 50, not examples, 50 separate tropes of resurrection in contemporary fiction. That's how common it is. And of course, TV Tropes mostly deals with fantasy fiction. It is so common that this little kid, Peter, is make a very reasonable guess. Oh, a character dies in a fantasy series? Well, let's hope that they come back to life. And Rowling's like, no, they can't. It's an important thing. It's so important for her as a person, that for her as a writer as well. His parents cannot come back to life. Just one more thing. I meant to show this at the beginning. From the Wikipedia page about Bucky Barnes. Until the Marvel Cinematic Universe came around, Bucky Barnes was a relatively minor character in Marvel comic books, but he was actually dead for 50 years. He was Captain America's sidekick, and they killed him in the 1950s. Stayed dead for over 50 years in the comics. Maybe because they wanted to have Captain America without a sidekick. I don't know. But there used to be an aphorism among comic book fans known as the Bucky Clause. In comics, no one stays dead except Bucky, Jason Todd, and Uncle Ben. Jason Todd was the Robin after Dick Grayson, the Robin whom nobody liked, and he got killed by a vote of fans in the 1980s, and he was dead for a while, and then they brought him back as the Red Hood in 2006. Now, Uncle Ben, except for alternate realities, Uncle Ben is still dead, but that's only because you can't have Spider-Man without the guilt of having indirectly caused the death of his uncle, as we said back at the beginning. The point is, if you're a comic book fan, and if you're not a comic book fan, you're interested in fantasy, you expect people to be resurrected. And J.K. Rowling went exactly in the opposite direction. Not just they probably won't be resurrected. It became so important that by the 7th book, it became a major theme that one of the Deadly Hallows is the Resurrection Stone. And people who try to resurrect, like even Dumbledore gives in to that temptation, it ends in tears. And part of Harry Potter becoming a better person, becoming a better version of himself by the end of the series, is that he chooses not to use the Resurrection Stone even when he gets it. He only uses it a very, very limited way. He brings back his parents and mentors as ghosts. He tries to touch them, and his hand goes through them. He's not really resurrecting them. And then when they reassure him that they will be with him as he goes to meet his apparent death, then he drops the stone. He's not interested in it. That's, for Rowling, that's like Harry Potter. Part of his triumph is that he finally recognizes what most people don't want to recognize. Part of maturity is recognizing that death is final. I understand why fantasy novels or fantasy films, whatever, want to express people's fantasies. And one fantasy, wouldn't it be great if our loved ones and mentors could come back to life? Yeah, fine, but that would be a fantasy. And I especially understand it in comic books because if it's serial fiction, you have to keep writing stories about the same characters. So, someone killed them off a couple of decades ago? Yeah, but I have a good story I want to write with them, so we'll have to bring them back. I understand that. But ultimately, I'm sorry to say this, but ultimately, it's not a very mature thing. I see Barry wrote, also Batman's parents, thank you, Batman's parents, in most continuities, stay dead because he would not have become a Batman if not for them. Thank you. So, as opposed to, let's say, Tchiyat HaMeitim is not in the here and now. In fact, at least according to the Rambam, Tchiyat HaMeitim is not even with Mashiach. Tchiyat HaMeitim is in the far future. When Mashiach comes, there will be no miracles, according to the Rambam. Yes, it's a debate in the Gemara. I was at a funeral not that long ago where somebody said, he feels so bad that his loved one died. Now he really hopes that there will be the resurrection of the dead. And I felt like, you know what? I'm not judging somebody who's in mourning, but it's not a very mature thing to say, because part of the law, all the laws and customs of mourning direct us towards accepting, coming to terms with the death, moving on. Shiva's only 7 days, and Shloshim is only 30 days, after which, except when mourning for a parent, the mourning is over. There's a custom of Kaddish. Fine, we continue that. But all the laws of mourning, except for a parent, they end after 30 days. And you've probably heard this idea before, that it's that's part of the brilliant psychological insight of the customs of the laws of mourning. Anyway, I want to point out that in the context of fiction, and especially fantasy fiction, what J.K. Rowling decided is super radical. And Moshe Rosenberg, here in source number 14, the one whom I showed you the book cover of before, this is actually not from his books. This is from a letter that he wrote to Jewish Action, the OU magazine, in response to somebody who wrote an essay about, oh no, Harry Potter's about magic. Maybe that's bad. Maybe we shouldn't let religious kids read books about magic. For the most part, I only heard about that among Christians. There were a few Jews who wrote that, and this was one of them. And Rabbi Rosenberg responded, long letter. You could read it online. But one thing that he gave an example of, like a value, a Jewish value that we can get from the Harry Potter books, is Harry's learning to cope with the loss of his parents. What rabbi has not had to teach this lesson to his kehillah? The Jews rejoice despite circumstances, not because of them. Harry must let go of the past in order to pursue his future. Might this not be just the counsel a Rav might offer an unhealthily guilt-ridden Avel, a mourner? And that's why we're not going to do this together, but I just wanted to recommend, when you get a chance, read through this piece that I uploaded to the website, Harry Potter Dealing with Death. It's not... I probably would have written it differently, or for sure J.K. Rowling would have written it differently, but the premise is an imaginary dialogue between Harry Potter, the character, and an Israeli teenager named Harel, who has lost his best friend in a terror attack. If Harry Potter and Harel had a conversation about dealing with death, what would they say to each other? That's the premise of this piece. I did not put on the source sheet, but I do recommend going through it. That's what I have to say about Harry Potter and the acceptance of death. That it's not just a good thing in general to be able to function despite the loss of our loved ones, but J.K. Rowling did something unfathomably radical in the context of fantasy fiction by making sure that not just part of the book, but a major part of the series, you can't bring anybody back from the dead. Having said that, I want to point out something that's not that well known about the books, and that is Alchemy. Alchemy, there's a lot to say about it, but just very briefly, it was the Middle Ages version of science, involved transformations, and now it's considered that it's pseudoscience, but back then science and religion, certainly for Christian Europe, science and religion went together, and the themes of alchemy appeared not only in medieval science, but in as pointed out by John Granger in every book that he wrote on Harry Potter, a bunch of authors used themes from alchemy. The examples that he gives in the Harry Potter's bookshelf book, specifically Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare and A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, where once you know the themes of alchemy, which we're not going to go through right now, once you know the themes, you could see how the author is plugging them in and constructing the plot, major plot lines based on it. J.K. Rowling admitted in an interview in 1998 that to invent this wizard world, I've learned a ridiculous amount about alchemy. She didn't write any details of it until 2013 when she had a website called Pottermore, which has now been converted into the website called Wizarding World. It's just one example that she gives. Colors played their part in the naming of Hagrid and Dumbledore. Their first names are Rubeus, that means red, and Albus, which means white. This is a nod to alchemy, so important in the first Harry Potter book, and it turns out in all the Harry Potter books, where the red and the white are essential components of the process. Where I'm skipping, I named the characters for the alchemical colors to convey their opposing but complementary natures. Red meaning passion, white for asceticism, Hagrid being the earthy and warm and physical, Dumbledore the spiritual, brilliant, and detached. Each is a necessary counterpoint to the other as Harry seeks father figures in his new world. So J.K. Rowling said explicitly, that's why, think about it, why is it that two of the main characters have names that mean red and mean white? And while we're at it, there's another major character who has a name that means black. Oh yeah, guy whose name is Black. It turns out the three stages, as spelled out here in source number 17, John Granger has it in great detail in his books, but he has it briefer in this article from 2003. The first stage of the alchemical work is the black stage, and Sirius Black is named for this. Second stage is called the albedo or white. The third last stage is called rubedo or the red stage. Why am I telling you this? Because it's not just that John Granger pointed out pretty early on that every one of the books is a trip through these stages, the themes that are associated with the three different stages. I'm not going to go into the details now, but and then there's a sort of being willing to die, somebody dying or being willing to die, and then a kind of a resurrection, sort of, or not quite dying at the end of the book. After he wrote this, John Granger then applied this to the later books. I don't remember if he predicted about book number 5, but I remember very clearly that he predicted in book number 6 not only who was going to die, but what the weather would be in the book, based on all the associations with the details of alchemy. Namely, J.K. Rowling had already written book number 5 in which a major character dies whose name is Black. So John Granger's like, well, okay, there's only one character whose name means white, Albus Dumbledore. Of course he's going to die in book 6. Then the only question is, okay, well, who's going to die in book 7 whose name means red? So I would have predicted that, based on what we saw in source number 16, that it would be Rubeus Hagrid. It turns out, as Rowling said in an interview here in source number 18, Hagrid had been safe in Rowling's mind from the very beginning. She planned for Hagrid to carry Harry out of the forest at the end. But she set things up for herself that a character has to die in book 7 whose name is or includes red. So she never said this explicitly, but if you go through, a bunch of people die in book 7. There are 2 people in book 7. Granted, they're not as close to Harry as Hagrid, but there are 2 people in book 7 whose names mean or include red. One of them is Rufus Scrimgeour. Rufus means red. He dies at the beginning of the book, and someone who dies near the end of the book is Fred Granger. So I used to think that, like, when I first heard this, I'm like, oh, it seemed like because all the Grangers, I said Granger, Fred Weasley. Oh, because all the Weasleys have red hair? No, it's because Fred has red in his name. So is that a little weak? Yeah, it's a little weak. I assume that what happened was that Rowling set things up for herself before she figured out who was going to die in the 7th book. I couldn't have Hagrid die. Yeah, but he's the one with a name that means red. Okay, so she worked it out in some way. I like the concept that besides admiring the book for what it is itself, the plot and the character and the themes, and there are so many interesting themes and Middot, as we said earlier, but then there's a whole additional level that most people would never get. I certainly didn't get. And once you see it, you're like, oh yeah. Not, oh yeah, oh that's very clever. Oh yes, this book is really Marxist. Oh yes, Shakespeare was really very Freudian. No, that's eisegesis. That's when you're like forcing something into a literary interpretation. No, I'm talking about where the author basically admits that they were doing this, and then you're like, oh, okay, once she says, I learned so much about alchemy, like, okay, let's see where alchemy fits. Oh, okay, I get it. Oh, I see how she did that and that. Something that some Jews are worried about, not so many, is about the Christian themes in the books. John Granger plays up the Christian themes. For some reason, Shiro Wolowski, in that first book that I showed you, Shiro Wolowski downplays the Christian themes, meaning you can have a bunch of the themes in the book do not have to be Christian, but the fact is that J.K. Rowling is a believing Christian, and what she said all the way back in the year 2000, back when there were still some Christians who were like, oh, you can't read these books, they have magic, magic is the devil. She said in an interview, that, every time I've been asked if I believe in God, I've said yes, because I do. But no one ever really has gone any more deeply into it than that. In other words, nobody asked her in 2000, are you putting any Christian stuff in your books? And I have to say, she said, that does suit me, because if I talk too freely about that, I think the intelligent reader, whether 10 or 60, will be able to guess what's coming in the books. How can you guess what's coming in the books? Because a Christian theme is that what they call in literary scholarship, a Christological figure or a Christ figure is somebody who dies or is willing to die in order to save people. And there are a bunch of books where that happens, like, for example, Tale of Two Cities. Trick question. And how many of the 7 Harry Potter books does one of the good guys die or is willing to die in order to save other people? And the answer is all 7. Because that's a theme. It doesn't have to be a Christian theme, but if someone's a Christian writer, you're not surprised if they put that in. So you can guess what's coming in the books. Now, what would you guess? Is the guess would be that Harry Potter has to be willing to die at the end of the 7th book in order to save everybody. So Harry Potter, that's exactly what happens. Harry Potter is willing to die. Asterisk. How exactly does Harry Potter not die? That got messy. That was perhaps the weakest part of the books. Her explanation about how Harry died but didn't really die. Later, some people anyway, were able to make more sense out of it. But at least some of us were reading that part and we're going, what? Wait, he's dead? He's alive? Anyway, but by the time the books were over in 2007, then J.K. Rowling was willing to talk a little bit more about the Christianity in her books. These books are not Christian explicitly, but she did admit to putting in a few Christian things. For example, in the top left of page 5, that in Deathly Hallows, Harry visits his parents' graves and he sees 2 biblical references, meaning from their Bible, the Christian Bible. One of them is the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death, which comes back to her theme, which is, there will be a resurrection of the dead in the future, but for the here and now, death is the last enemy. Death is not an enemy that you can vanquish now and don't even try. So for her, that concept, basically Rowling took what was so important to her. You can't beat death. Don't try to do so. It will make you less human. That's what happened to Rowling. That's what Rowling had happened to Voldemort in the books. For her, not only is that important, but for her, that ties into her Bible as well. And she says that these quotations almost epitomize the whole series. We only have a couple minutes left. I want to talk briefly about a theme that appeared in the first couple of years. Should we be worried? We mentioned that there were some Christians who are like, oh, well, witchcraft is a bad thing, and even a few, should we let our kids read these books? Even a few Orthodox Jews, here in source number 22, this is the article that Rabbi Rosenberg was writing in a letter afterwards against, an article called Under the Spell of Harry Potter, and she says, can a world of magic be treated as entertainment, or is it somehow a form of idolatry, acknowledging the presence of powers other than God? Are Harry Potter and his magic really bad for our kids? And with the implication that yes, this is a problem. It turns out, though, that Orthodox Jews, with rare exceptions, did not follow Yaffa Gans that way, meaning there are some Orthodox Jews, maybe even a lot of them, where they don't have secular literature in their homes at all. Okay, well, they're not reading books about magic or about anything that's not a Torah book. But how about those of us who do read literature? How about, for example, American Haredim, where a lot of them do read books? So I thought this is a really great quote. I'm sorry it's no longer on the internet, but I have the original article. Source number 23, Rabbi Avi Shafran, the spokesperson for Agudath Yisrael of America. He, who is often, he's the one to defend the Torah view, Torah true, and against, modern Orthodox or whoever he's criticizing this week. But in this case, he just blew it off. I think we have a little more enlightened attitude towards fiction than they, the Christian right. We trust our children to separate in their minds the difference between reality and fantasy. And where did he get this from? He got it from none other than Rav Moshe Feinstein. Because Rav Moshe Feinstein, who sadly never got a chance to read the Harry Potter books, he died in 1986, he wrote a tshuva about magic shows. And are you allowed to attend a magic show? After all, you're not allowed to support Kishuf. Kishuf is a prohibition in the Torah. You're not allowed to do magic, so maybe you're not allowed to watch magic shows. Oh, so the Rambam says the magic is just sleight of hand. So, and that's not, it's a problem for the Rambam, because according to the Rambam, there never was such a thing. I just reversed it by accident. For the Rambam, there never was such a thing as real magic. It was all a fake. So the magician gets up on stage in the top hat and the whatever sleight of hand. That's what the Torah says you're not allowed to do, sleight of hand. So it could be a problem. And Rav Moshe does not say it's totally fine. Meaning, according to the other opinion, according to the Ramban and the majority opinion, the Torah is talking about doing real magic, calling on real magical forces, which apparently, according to the Chazal and most opinions, certainly through the Middle Ages, there was such a thing as real magic. Somebody gets up on stage today for a magic show. That's not real magic. They're just doing sleight of hand. So it should be fine, according to that opinion, to go to a magic show. So Rav Moshe Feinstein doesn't want to take sides, and he says, well, I would rather avoid the issue, meaning it's better to be strict and not go to a magic show. But in his last paragraph, there's a long tube, I just brought little bits of it. He responds to what the questioner brought up. That Rav Moshe says, on this you're just wrong. The questioner said, oh, well, kids are really impressed. They're like, they will be taken in by the magician, and they'll think that, wow, this magician has supernatural powers. And Rav Moshe says, he frees Alamida. You, sir, have gone too far. You're exaggerating. Yiladim choshvim shadam gadolhu. Kids who go to a magic show, they'll be very impressed with the guy's technical skills. But there's no reason to be concerned. They'll think he has real powers. Everybody knows that magicians on stage don't have any real powers. So, give your kids a little bit more credit. Or in other words, what Rabbi Shafran then said, applying it to the Harry Potter books, we trust our children to separate in their minds the difference between reality and fantasy. And that's why, with the exception of a few people here and there in the Orthodox world, you either have the people who don't read any non-Torah fiction, and the people who do read non-Torah fiction, including fantasy works. See, Mark points out that the magician should say this is not real magic and should even reveal how it's done. I don't remember if Rav Moshe says that explicitly in his tshuva, but I know people, amateur magicians, who have been told that as a just in case in practice. just want to clarify that what I'm doing is sleight of hand. I'm not really using magical powers. Somebody asked Rav Shlomo Aviner this question about is it a problem to read? He says it's not a problem to read. He says if there's any problem, it's flight from reason, and people are turning to fortune tellers, astrologists, coffee grounds readers, deceitful, fake Hasidic rebbes. It's like that's what we should worry about. Okay, if people can't tell the difference between somebody you could trust and somebody you can't trust. Okay, but like reading a book that's clearly fantasy, that's not a problem. Rav Aviner said that and wrote that in source number 25, and then source 26, he wrote a follow-up that some people told him, the book series that they're asking you about, Harry Potter, there are amazing Middot in that series. Rav Aviner apparently did not know anything about it at all. The people told him the central lesson of these books is the importance of being friendly and courageous, and in fact, he was not allowed to use his talents to solve life's problems. So he says, oh, okay. Well, the principle that we have to work hard and flee from tricks still stands. It turns out it's not relevant to the Harry Potter books at all. I just thought that was interesting, an interesting point. There was a Catholic here in source number 29. Somebody said that if there's any objection from a religious perspective to Harry Potter books, is that there isn't enough religion in it, that people don't turn to God. That maybe I don't want my children reading books where the main characters are solely on their own and God is not a part of their lives. Maybe, but even he didn't say don't let your kids read these books. He just said that we need to finish the job that Harry Potter begins. We should introduce our children to a truly supernatural world, not of magic but of grace. That's more of a Christian formulation. But Avat Hashem, Yirat Hashem. But I just thought it was interesting that for the most part, religious Jews were not bothered by the issue of the fantasy or magic in the books. Let's briefly summarize what we spoke about. Then I'll wrap it up, and then I'll take questions. We spoke about some of the good Middot and the lessons of the series. We looked at a few of the quotes, including some that for me are like super insightful and valuable. We spoke about the acceptance of death as a big deal for Rowling as a person and why she made it a central part of her books. And she's going against this, what I don't think anybody else, at least in writing, has said this, going against the trend of fantasy fiction in general. And then we mentioned about the themes of alchemy, a little bit of the themes of Christianity, and then we ended with the we're not really concerned about Kishuf. I should just add, I think we mentioned this very briefly in the first session about Orthodox Jews tend not to be worried about, like, let's say, letting their kids read the Narnia books, where there's more explicit Christian stuff in the Narnia books than the Harry Potter books. So I think that at least some of this lack of concern is that the Narnia books are not explicitly Christian. And the Harry Potter books are also not explicitly Christian. And the Lord of the Rings books are not explicitly Christian. Yet, when you know the author is Christian, you could see, not just Christian, but like a religious Christian, you could see why they wrote things in certain ways. But that doesn't mean that you have to read the books in a Christian way. And certainly a Jewish kid who is not really familiar with the details of Christianity, they might very well read about Aslan being killed and resurrected and just like, okay, whatever. And they don't feel like that's a Christian thing because it's not explicitly Christian. C.S. Lewis wrote his books for Christian children who would be expected to tie in Aslan. Oh, Aslan is really Jesus. Okay, but for those of us for whom where our religious education has nothing to do with Jesus, then we don't tie in Aslan with Jesus. I just, if you ask, why did C.S. Lewis write it that way? Oh, that's why he wrote it that way. But it's not a reason not to read the books. That's not what makes the books great. And so too with the Lord of the Rings and the where it's not so obvious where the Christian themes are, but there are at least a couple of Christian themes in the Lord of the Rings, if you know where to look. And even the Harry Potter books, even though John Granger has extensive in all of his books, including the one that I especially recommended, he talks about Christian themes in Harry Potter. For me, that's not a big deal because it's kind of like going on behind the scenes, and it's not a major part of the action. It's only there like on the remez level. Anyway, our time is up. Thank you for joining me. I recommend when you get a chance, go through the parts of the source sheet we didn't go through, and the supplementary material. Next week we will have class at the same time, even though some of us will be lighting Hanukkah candles before that. And then the week after that, we will also have class at the regular time, and that will be the last class in this series. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to end the recording now, and then I'll stay and take questions.